Abby, I haven't seen you in a hot minute either. How are you?
I'm good. I was actually back in Bloomington very briefly a few weeks ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
I spent election night with her. It was
Yeah.
great. It was the best way. It was the best
We went to farm.
Uh-huh.
That was fun.
Nice.
Over
Nice,
truffle
nice.
fries and with Doug's custom creation cocktails.
Yeah, Farm's truffle
Oh
fries are
yeah,
amazing.
you had an espresso martini.
That's my thing at farm. That's like the good one.
All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. I'm really happy that you all were able to spend some time here to talk about an issue that's, of course, really important to us. This event is entitled "Women's Health and Stare Decisis," and it's a conversation about the future of choice in Indiana. We are joined today by the one and only Natalia Galvan, chair of the 9th District Latino Caucus, leadership in Monroe County now. She served in multiple campaigns and vital roles, and she's a 2020 to 2021 inductee of Hoosier Women Forward. She also serves all of us in the Indiana Democratic Party. So Natalia, you're a busy person. Thank you for your time today. We're also joined today by Shruti Rana, of course, as many of you know, is the vice chair of the Monroe County Democratic Party. But not only that, she too is a local leader, the assistant dean, professor, and director at the IU Hamilton Lugar School of Global and International Studies. Of course, received her JD from Columbia Law, where she was editor-in-chief of the Columbia Journalism for Gender and Law and co-chair of the Columbia Legal Women's Association. Of course, lots of board experience, including the American Board Association Corporate and Social Responsibility Committee, where you were vice chair of policy, and the International Action Network for Gender Equity and Law. Locally here, Shruti serves as one of the representatives keeping our elections safe. So Shruti, thank you for your service. All right, that's about as much talking as I want to do. So I wanted to open up the floor for introductory statements on this very important topic. And Natalia, can we start with you?
Sure. So actually it probably would be, I'm gonna just throw it to Shruti so she can kind of set the stage, right? So after the political leak happened, that's where I went to first. So I went to Shruti. I'm like, oh my God, it feels like the world's falling. What's going on?
Well, thank you. So what I thought I would do is just give everybody a little bit of a legal overview and then put it back to Natalia about what we can do now. So if that works. And I think it's appropriate. I don't know if you can hear the thunder behind me, right? When we started, right? Natalia said the sky was falling and then all of a sudden we heard thunder.
Oh no.
Well, I just wanted to say a little bit about what all of this means from a legal perspective. So I want to start out by saying that this leak right now is a draft decision, not actually enforced. So it's important to recognize that until we see the final decision, abortion is actually legal in the United States, in Indiana, not so much in Texas, but in other places right now. And we do really need to wait for the final decision to figure out how the law is going to be changed. But what we have with the leaked opinion is a roadmap for where we're going forward, and with a lot of warning signs, I think. So I just want to briefly cover what I think that means. So the title of this session focused on stare decisis. So I just want to tell you the legal definition of stare decisis. It's a legal principle that basically says courts are supposed to follow historical precedent or historical cases when you make a ruling on a similar case. And it's just that basic concept of you treat like alike. So if you give one person a 5-year sentence for theft of, an object that cost a certain amount of money, if someone else does that in the future, you should give them a similar sentence or at least treat them similarly, right? This is how we try to be, we want consistency, predictability, fairness, and equality coming out of our legal system, right? So this goes back many centuries. So what we have now in the draft decision is a draft decision that completely disregards stare decisis and really sets new ground. So I just want to talk about that. So first of all, the Supreme Court can actually change its mind, overrule prior decisions, or come up with a new rule. It's supposed to do so following a lot of other legal principles, and I don't really think that's the case here. I think that the draft decision shows us that we have a Supreme Court right now where the majority is completely unreined and wants to reshape America, but reshape America by going backwards. So I think that the draft opinion that we've seen so far is historically inaccurate, legally quite radical, and I think intellectually dishonest in a lot of ways. But that's not without precedent, right? We've actually seen many cases like that in the past. We have Dred Scott, we have Korematsu, we have all sorts of horrible cases coming out of the US Supreme Court, which were really aimed at discriminating against groups of people. I mean, Dred Scott is even worse than discrimination. It was about enslavement and servitude. So we know that we have this history in the United States, and we've tried to move forward, and we've tried to really fulfill the guiding principles in our Constitution, starting with the Equal Protection Clause, right? That guarantees that every person in the United States is supposed to be treated equally, and that we have certain rights, whether or not they're actually listed word by word in the Constitution, right? So what this draft opinion is trying to do is basically going everything after the 14th Amendment. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. 14th Amendment established our Equal Protection Clause. The 14th Amendment is where we get the right to privacy, which includes the right to have abortion remain an issue for a woman to have bodily autonomy over her own body or make a choice in consultation with her own doctor, not with interference from the state or other people. What the decision basically does is put all of that at risk, going back all the way to the roots of the 14th Amendment, all the different rights that we see stemming from the right to privacy, bodily autonomy, substantive due process, where we see our rights. He's casting all of that in doubt, overruling Roe, but then casting all of these in doubt. So I'm just going to read you a little quote from Lawrence Tribe, right? So he says, of course, this decision overrules Roe, but casts into doubt the entire right to privacy and bodily autonomy from government intrusion. So he says, this is the quote, but there is more. After reading the draft, you quickly realize that all the rights that people have long taken for granted, like the right to decide whom to marry, whether to use birth control, with whom to have sex, how to raise your children, and an endless list of other freedoms will no longer be protected unless you can point to language in the Constitution expressly guaranteeing those rights or convince 5 Supreme Court justices that they're deeply rooted in this nation's history and tradition and implicit in the concept of ordered liberty. So these are things, these concepts I said at the end are things that Alito just basically made up, right? He's saying unless we have a long tradition of same-sex marriage, it can't, or government sanctioned same-sex marriage, it can't, we don't have a right to it going forward. So this is a very inaccurate view of history, right? We know that people have been fighting for equality, have had same-sex relationships, have had abortions, have decided how they want to raise their children throughout history, and it's other people who've tried to stop them from exercising their rights as human being and, you know, fulfilling their lives in the way that they want to. So this is why you see in this decision, so that's bad enough. Overruling Roe is drastic and bad enough. It overturns 50 years of the most recent legal precedent around the country at the Supreme Court. It puts in doubt everything going back to, you know, basically the 1870s, right? Right after the Civil War, when we're putting in place the 13th and the 14th Amendments and the amendments that come after that. So all of that progress, right, since the Civil War is at risk. And I'm deliberately bringing up the Civil War because he's sort of saying we want to cast all of these decisions back to the states. So we have this states' rights arguments, which again, where did we see that? We saw that leading up to the Civil War, this idea that your local legislatures should get to decide how people live and what they do. And it sounds superficially okay, make it up to local decision making, but fundamental rights should never be up to your neighbors, right? It should never be up to the people around you to decide whether you have the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, like our founding documents say that you should. And in Indiana, that means the Indiana legislature would have the right to decide whether or not abortion was available or legal, whether people were criminalized for pursuing reproductive justice, whether people, you know, would be able to marry the person of their choice, whether it's someone of a different sex, same sex, different race, same race, all of these things. can be cast into doubt. So the last thing I would say about this decision, and going back to this idea of stare decisis and following history and all of that, is that it does go back and follow very particularly ugly parts of our history, right? There's much has been said about how Justice Alito cites a discredited, legal source from hundreds of years ago who believed that women were their husband's property and that marital rape should be legal because women were not human beings with their own rights to say yes or no over their bodies, but were their husband's property once they got married. You'll see there's language like the domestic supply of adoptable infants and things like that, right? These are all going back to just really disreputable ideas about people as property rather than people as, human beings worthy of the rights to life and liberty. There's a section that talks about women. It's easy to sweep away Roe because women's reliance interests on Roe and bodily autonomy are less important than contractual property rights. So there's some really disgusting language in there. And I want to emphasize, going back to this idea of stare decisis, we've seen it all before. We've just seen it all before in completely horrible circumstances that we thought we had overcome, that, our nation was actually founded on to overcome and move past. And we've moved past some of those things. And this is attempting to throw us all back. So on that note, I will turn it back over to Natalia.
Okay, so I'll take it from here. So after that, I react just like everybody else does, like, oh my God, the sky's falling. It's too much. Let's just doom scroll and shop on Amazon or something of that nature, right? It's like, let's hunker down and it's just too much. But the thing is that people who've been following this and people who are like watching, like Shruti and I first had this conversation last year. Like she knew that this was coming last year. And we knew that something like this was going to come last year. We've seen what our state legislature is going to do, right? It's like the Maya Angelou quote, when people show you who they are, believe them the first time. And we've seen what awful legislation they put past, and how everybody is just not treated equally in their eyes, right? That's just the state that we live in. So I think beginning last year, it was having this conversation. I remember feeling very defeated and driving over to Shruti's house over this kind of catastrophe. And it's like, where do we go? And it's like, well, so the local county or the local chapter of Monroe County now, and the president, Shruti is the vice president. It's a very equitable board, right? It's like there's about 8 or 9 of us that are we want better. And we want better not only for us, but all the generations to come. The little voices that you'll hear in the background crying, the work is very much with the notion that we must do better for everybody else to come, right? So even when it gets really upsetting, overwhelming, that's what continues to drive me personally, is that my niece downstairs screaming right now, I have to at least try. So I think that kind of guided what's next, right? Like what are we gonna do? Because this is all very overwhelming. So in January, the Monroe County Now chapter reached out to Shelley Yoder, and our State Senator Shelley Yoder, and Representative Matt Pierce. We are very lucky in Bloomington to be represented by such amazing people in the State House, right? And so Matt has been serving for since the early 2000s, right, in the State House, and he was able to kind of get an idea. So it was a great meeting that we had. I encourage everyone to go to our Monroe County Now Facebook page. We link to YouTube, and we have a little bit about what his thoughts are about how a session would look in June, right? So they're going back at the end of the month to do revisions. He does not think it's going to happen then. The decision shouldn't be out by then. He thinks it's going to happen in June. and he said that it could go any number of ways, right? It could happen in one day, essentially, because we are in such super minority, because of the Democratic Party is in such a super minority. A decision to about Roe in Indiana specifically could be overturned in a day, or it could take a couple weeks. Who's to know, right? But we're planning by the end of the summer to radically live in a different state in terms of our rights and freedoms. And so what are we going to do accordingly? So we have been in meetings for months, just about what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts? In Indiana, I jokingly, frustratingly, a little lovingly, but like mostly frustratingly say, we all live in silos, right? There's a lot of people doing something here, a lot of people doing something there. How do we all kind of work together because we're upset about the same thing, right? So we've been having conversations, try to streamline that and at least understand what everybody else is doing. So in the short term here in Monroe County, what our focus on in Monroe County now, and we're like, we need to make it simpler because it's very overwhelming, right? So on our Facebook page and on our website, facebook.com/Monroe County Now, we made a graphic. And so we're basically looking at three different things, right? The first thing is immediate, right? So if life changes in terms of not being able to access any services that you previously were able to access, what does that look like? So we are really trying to fund and contribute to. Shruti's on the board. That's one of her many other hats too, of All Options, which is a wonderful resource center. It's a nationwide resource center, but it's locally, or what their headquarters is in Bloomington, and they chose us. So that's very special. I didn't know that until very recently. They came to speak at one of our chapter meetings, but to hear that we were chosen, right, to be where one of their main offices are is very special, I feel like. And so what can we do to support them and support their efforts? And that's number one, right? So because they will help. If you have a question, if you are in need of services, if you just need guidance and support, All Options. And Shruti just put the link on in the chat, and that's number one. Number two is smaller. Is continuing to talk to all these organizations that are aligned with our mission in terms of protecting women's rights or protecting reproductive rights, protecting freedoms, and stuff of that nature. That conversation is ongoing. And the third one, and the only way, literally the only way to make any changes is to elect pro-choice leadership at the State House. That is really the only way out of this, right? Is that we really need different leadership that will not take away freedoms in our State House. That is hard. That is much harder because even though Bloomington, we're so lucky with Shelley and with Matt and stuff, it is quite difficult all around the state to do that. However, as Peter noted, I have quite a number of organizations and affiliations that I'm a part of. So that means using privilege to say we need to organize better. We need to help different areas in Indiana. If they don't have somebody running for the State House, can they contribute to ours? We have a race here in Monroe, that is Monroe County, that is Jackson, that's Brown County in 62. Can people contribute to that? Can people contribute to other areas? Curtis, we have a candidate in 46. We have multiple candidates all around the state that would love like $5, $10, even if you're hours away from them. There's always ways to help candidates that you believe in by text banking for them or just reaching out to their campaign. I was talking to one of my fellow Hoosier Women Forward friends who's running for office yesterday, and she lives 2 hours away from me, but I'm like, how can I help? Right? There's always ways to help. And so right now we're working on literature and just getting just something easy, right? For people to see, hey, I have $5 extra, I can donate to this candidate. So we're working on that so that because right now, in fact, right, there's at least 3 rallies that I can name in Indiana in all different corners, right, which is great. The only thing is we need to use that labor and that energy and harness it into electing new people, because as angry and as frustrated and as scared as scary as all this is, really that's the only thing that's going to change it. So we're trying to really just like not lose hope and not lose focus, that that's really the only way out of this. And so that is our pivot for the next couple months until November, and just helping as many people as we can get through this to the State House.
Well, thank you both for such thoughtful talks about where we are right now and where we can go. I think there's a lot of food for thought there. But I wanted to pivot to something that I think should be the title of this podcast, which, Natalia, you said why you shouldn't just doom scroll and shop online. And my question is, we're starting to see a lot of conversations happening in the printed press and the academic press and other areas where there's just a lot of information out there. The Lancet, of course, famously has this great cover story about the health of women is just, it's a dire situation. And, so my question to both of you is, where should the ordinary person be reading? Where should the ordinary person be getting good information? And Shruti, as you pointed out, this is not a decided decision. This is a link, this is a draft. So what do we read? Where do we go?
So that's a really good question. And this is where I think we have to turn to the people who have been fighting the fight and been there all along, right? So we mentioned the Hoosier Abortion Fund. There are a number of abortion funds throughout the country. There are so many places in our country where abortion has been basically banned or is completely inaccessible or almost completely inaccessible. And people have been laying the groundwork for what to do when there's a post-Roe world. And those are the people to trust and support and give money to. So we don't need to recreate the wheel and recreate different networks or anything. We can support what is already there, for one thing. And I wanted to say a little bit going back to what Natalia was saying, and then go back to like what some of the trusted sources are. But I think Natalia is describing this thing that we're all feeling, which is that this is what happens when a right is taken away. Right? It means nothing is guaranteed anymore. You have to fight for every single win. And, part of the reason that I brought up that the decision casts all these other things that we take for granted into doubt is because I think it really makes clear that fighting for one of us means we're fighting for all of us. Right? So I've definitely heard people say things like, well, I can't get pregnant, or I'm, this isn't going to affect me, or I'm not interested in marriage, or whatever. But the point of, what we get out of this draft opinion is that all of these things are interlinked, right? So if you are protecting a right for someone else, something that you might never need yourself and might never access, you're building this coalition of people who are ultimately might protect you later on, right? And so I think we need to think about it that way. And it shouldn't just be that we're focused on abortion necessarily, but thinking about, that we need to shore up equal rights for everybody, right? We need to shore up human dignity, liberty, bodily autonomy, that when you take these things away, lots of things could happen. You might be completely against abortion, for example, but removing Roe means that you are removing the protection against forced sterilizations and like children being taken away from their parents, right? So like people need to understand, I think, how these things are all linked and what it means to fight for something, even if it doesn't personally affect you, or even if you think it's not something you yourself want to do. But should other people have the right to make that decision, or have the rights to make decisions about their own bodies? Did you want to focus back to like trusted sources, or just what we think we should be focusing on?
Let's stick on trusted sources for now, and then maybe we can delve deeper into what next steps could be.
Yeah, well, definitely, I think in Indiana, we're so lucky to have a group like All Options and the Hoosier Abortion Fund that are really doing the work. There's also the National Network of Abortion Funds. You can donate to the entire group, and the money is divided amongst 80 or so abortion funds all around the country. And I think, again, it goes back to supporting the groups that are already there on the ground doing this stuff because they know how to safely transport people, they know how to safely connect them with medical information. Resist the impulse to share like home remedies and things like that, or herbal remedies and things, because these things can be really dangerous, right? I mean, I've seen lots of things out there where people talking about herbs and weeds and things that cause miscarriage, but the way they do that is they're just toxic to like people in general, right? So you're putting your own life at risk, and it's just we want to send people to the safest options available, right? So those options exist. They might become further and further out of reach, but we are in 2022. We have medical science. We have historical knowledge about safe and healthy options, and we need to make sure that people get to those. We need to make sure that people are protected. I've seen a lot about how people's how surveillance data or cell phone data can be turned over. I think all of those things are quite possible. We do live in a society where this information is traceable and easily shared. So I think be careful. It's hard to say. Um, I would say just try to look for the safest and sort of most vetted material that you can if you're going to share something or you're going to send somebody in a certain direction. And I just think, again, I just go back to the abortion funds. Like, they've been doing the work, they know what they're doing, they have these systems in place, and they just need more support. And it can be financial or financial support, or donating your time or energy, or even just letting people know that they exist. And I think those are really valuable services.
I'm really glad you said that. And I just want to interject just very quickly. Even in my feeds, I'm getting a lot of disinformation about period tracking apps. So there might be some like information about, well, this is going to happen or this will happen, and so it's really hard to tell when I use the term misinformation about what is true, what is happening now, and what is conjecture about what might happen in the future. So I really appreciate your wisdom. Natalia.
Yeah, I just like to echo what Shruti said. So so on our Monroe County Now Facebook page, I put a link in the chat. We did a graphic, right? So we can just keep sharing. It has a lot of those websites that Shruti mentioned, just about where you can find stuff about independent abortion clinics, telling, Hochul for no special session, stuff like that. But I honestly do feel like she mentioned it all, because I do feel like even just going on Twitter, right? It's like it's so overwhelming. There's so much to just, I think, demoralize people and to stay stuck. And I'm like, I get it. And that's what takes me to Amazon or whatever, But I think that we need you. Like, we need you in the fight, even if it's just giving $5 to All Options, or it's telling somebody about the links, right? And so that I would just offer that, because too much information is very overwhelming sometimes for myself personally. So how do we just bring it down a little bit, like, just what do we have to do right now, and what do we have the power and the energy to tackle today? Because maybe you can't do it today, maybe it's going to come tomorrow, but definitely we need you. So we're all in this.
That's wonderful. I had some follow-up questions, but before I speak anymore, I wanted to know if anybody else in the audience had any questions for Shruti or Natalia about the future of abortion here in Indiana. Emma, go ahead.
I think that Shruti has the right of it, that we know how to get people abortions. We know what technology we need. We know what resources we need. And those resources are gathering. We will have those resources. What we don't know is how to get the State House back. Our enjambment our policy problem has to do with an unbreakable majority in the State House. And all these rights that we have mentioned today are at risk until
Can I take that really quick? I know that you mentioned Shruti and I don't want to like overstep. Okay, yeah. No, but you're 1,000,000% correct. You are 100% right. Like there is no doubt in my 100%. So I will tell you what brings me hope though, right? Because a lot of times it's not with maybe our leadership. Honestly, it's with some of the people that are doing the grassroots work. So on Thursday, May 26th at 7:30 on Zoom, Monroe County now, we have our general chapter meeting and it's always on Zoom just with the pandemic and everything. So it can be accessible to everybody, but we have a guest. So Shruti is in this class of class 4 of Hoosier Women Forward. I was in class 3, like Peter mentioned. I was in class 3 with this amazing leader named Hiba Almi. And she is the former executive director. She just stepped down in May of the Indiana Muslim Advocacy Network, Iman, right? And you can look them up on Facebook. They have a very active social media and website. They're amazing. Well, what she did is she said, my people are not being heard. Right. And she's with a group of activists and leaders and said, our Muslim voice is not being heard in Indiana. And we need to do better. And she organized, and I say she, but she's with a group, you know, like, and I'm not trying to disparage anybody else's work, but she's the one who will join us on this coming or in 2 weeks. And she's like, we can do better, we can be better. And so she reached out, not only the people in her district, but she reached out statewide. And she's like, your voice and your vote matters. And that's where we went wrong somewhere. I'm like, I'm a bloomerang. So I went to IU for undergrad. I went away and then I came back in 2017. And it is crazy to me how many people are not voting, right? And how we need them, right? I was talking a little bit earlier to Peter, or we were just talking about election day, and I went to Social Cantina. I went to 2 places on that primary election day. I went to Southern Stone for lunch, and I went to Social Cantina for dinner. And at the staff at neither had voted that day. They didn't even know there was an election in Bloomington. And we had a lovely experience at Southern Stone, and they're like, I'm gonna go vote. Like I was actually at lunch with a candidate, and he's like, I'm on the ballot, I would love your vote. And she's like, I will go, and I will, you know, we were talking about issues and everything. And then at dinner, it was already closed, voting was closed. And how do we reach people, right? And I think Hiba did a beautiful job to say, we need to tell people that we need to tell them how important these issues are, because they're so busy with life. It's like groceries are expensive, gas is expensive, my kid is sick, you know, my mother-in-law, or, you know, whatever, just work's awful, or I'm not being paid enough, or what have you, that it gets lost. All these bites are getting lost, right? And she's like, we can do better. And she organized a statewide network. And not only did she do that and just increase the amount of turnout incredibly, but she helped flip a red seat blue, right? And she was instrumental in helping Senator Fadi Kadora not only win a very red area, but out fundraise almost all the other candidates, just statewide, right? Like he was one of the top fundraisers in that cycle, in a very, very competitive cycle. So I mean, I look to that, Pamela. Like I don't know that, like, I'm on these leadership boards and we're pushing people to listen, and like we're at a danger zone, you know, like things can always be like, things are bad, you know, this is the time to organize and to do that. But I look to people like Hiba too, to really just learn from, right? And say, we can do that. How can we do that? within our own circles. And then Shruti did something very similar to that in 2020. And I am also part of, like Peter mentioned, Latino Caucus. And it takes all of us to organize our networks too and make sure that our neighbors, our friends, our family know your vote and your voice matters. So yes, all of that.
Yeah, and I think Natalia said it perfectly. And all I would add to that is to think about how these things are all linked, right? It is not an accident that the Voting Rights Act was gutted first. It is not an accident that gerrymandering was allowed to continue unrestrained throughout the country first, right? And to add to what Natalia is saying, I think we need to think about why inclusivity matters and also how hard it is to build things, right? It's so easy to tear something down in a matter of moments, but it takes years to build things. And I think people need to understand when we're talking about guaranteeing and enforcing rights, we're engaging in a long and difficult process of bringing many groups of people together towards a common cause and building something from the bottom up, which is inherently more difficult than tearing something down that's already there, right? And it's easy to turn people against one another and make them hate one another. It's much harder to bring people together and focus on a common goal. And that's what we have to do now. And I think that there's a couple of things we can keep in mind. If we think about why Roe became so endangered and why we are where we are now, part of it is because the people whose voices were most affected were not being heard throughout this whole process. So I've seen a lot out there that are talking about, for example, most pollsters are male. So when they write questions asking about whether people support abortion rights, they ask questions from a lens that doesn't make sense to a lot of people who might actually face the choice to have an abortion at some point. And when you have people who understand these rewrite the questions, support for abortion skyrockets, right? So there's like an example I've seen where when you say something like, do you support late-term abortion? A lot of people will say no, right? It sounds terrible. They don't know what you're talking about. It's not defined. Most people are not doctors. Why would they even know what somebody is talking about? If you reframe the question as, here's a woman who's facing a difficult choice. She found out that the baby she is carrying will not survive, more than a few hours after birth, or has something that would cause a very short lifetime full of pain, or something like that, right? Should that woman have the ability to ask for an abortion even though she's past XYZ limit in your state? And then most people say yes, right? When you frame it in the way that people actually make choices. So, the only way to move forward, I think, is to make sure that the voices of the people who are affected are amplified and heard. And also that we understand that we're building something and we're doing something incredibly difficult. So I completely understand why people feel like they don't want to vote when they're not that inspired by the people there or something. But it's like, you vote now so that the people who will inspire you, you help build that bench so that they will be there next, right? Everybody has to stand on someone else's shoulders. Like just start, even, like I look at my own life, right? And the generation younger than me has created so much change in terms of gender issues and racial issues, and I'm able to stand on their shoulders, right? When I go into a workplace environment that's more diverse in terms of the people who are younger than me, it gives me a chance to have a leadership role that I wouldn't have had 20 years ago, where like no one looked like me. Does that make sense, right? And so I think about how to build these coalitions over time, and across people who are just experiencing really different things. And I think we also have this sense in America that things can never get that bad, and that all these, like, somebody will step in at some point and stop it, right? Like, people are always like, well, the Supreme Court's never going to do anything that crazy. And they are, right? Once you tip the balance and spend 40 years putting really radical people in there, eventually the radical people like take over. And that's what we're seeing now. And so we can't have that sense of complacency. We can't have that sense that somebody will step in at some point and it will be okay. There's no one to step in right now. If the Supreme Court overrules Roe, there's not enough people in Congress to vote to codify Roe. The president can't really do anything except in sort of marginal cases. And it goes back to local environments and states, and then we just have to, like, you know, basically start from the bottom and build it up, right? Redo all that work that like got us to Roe in the first place. This, you know, the civil rights movement that got us to where we are, right? I mean, we do know if it was done before, we can do it again, and we know how hard it was, and we just have to keep people motivated throughout.
I think it's important to keep affirming that it is not just abortion, that it's everything in the 14th Amendment.
Definitely. I think almost everything that enables us to put our lives together today is at risk, right? I mean, it's, you know, reproductive justice is intertwined with almost every aspect of every person's life, right? So, and I think we, you know, maybe have to keep thinking about how we are all interconnected, right? Like maybe, like I was saying, that, you know, you yourself or the person you're talking to might never become pregnant or have an abortion, but you definitely know somebody who will or has, right? And I just, yeah, I think we just keep going back. I mean, the 14th Amendment is so short, right? It's less than a paragraph long, and it just is one sentence from which we like draw this idea that we all have a right to equal dignity and to live the lives that we want to, you know, with freedom and respect. And chipping away one part of that just damages the entire thing.
I really appreciate you saying that, Shruti, especially given that in a coalition of to try to build back what to replace these rights that we could potentially be losing, we definitely are going to need to be including people like me, like men who, you know, this doesn't affect me, right? But it does, and I really appreciate you saying that. Natalia, I had a follow-up question for something you said earlier. And I think there's been consensus around the fact that we simply need to elect more pro-choice candidates to office here in Indiana. But you know, for those of us that aren't really in the know, those of us that aren't involved in politics, where do we go to find pro-choice candidates running in Indiana?
That's a great question, Peter. It's almost like I paid you to ask that question. So right now, I am on the State Central Committee for the Democratic Party, right? So that's kind of like the board of directors, I guess. I am one of two members of Indiana Latino Democratic Caucus, that one of the two voting members on the State Central Committee. So with that, we're involved in like a lot of different like little committee groups or whatever with state leadership, right? And so in the State House, they have like staff members that work under the Senate and under the House, right? And it's like a legislative caucus, right? So like if you decide, Peter, or anyone decides to go run for like State House or State Senate, they have staff members that are there in theory, like to guide and to help and answer any questions and stuff and offer kind of some support, right? So we've been in conversations with them to just come up with something quick, something small, right? That it's like if you decide to go to a rally at the courthouse or downtown or wherever, anywhere in Indiana, you can have a little flyer that says, here you go, Peter, because it's very, very difficult to manage everybody's social media. Like, oh, he's running there, but they're running there. We have so many different races to kind of look at. So one thing that Matt Pierce said at our January meeting that just really had a lasting impact on me is that kind of what Pamela said is right about we're in such a super minority in terms of people who even want to protect basic liberties, right? And so we need to retain everything we have right now, right? And some of the remember we were just redistricted in a couple months ago, right? Last year. So those districts even look a little different. So you have to retain every elected Democrat or every elected pro-choice representative that we have right now. And we have to add 7 in each chamber. So we have to add 7 to the Senate and 7 to the House, retaining everything we have right now, right? That is hard. That is overwhelming, but it also is a little confusing because Representative Pierce doesn't have a challenger in the general, so we're good. But if we wanted to use our efforts, he's my rep, so if I wanted to use my efforts, where could I best use them, right? And so we have been in conversations so that at these rallies that are going on today and all over, maybe we can send them a PDF, right? So people can have a little handbill. Hey, if you have $5 extra, support this candidate, and you have a list of like 30 on each side, or whatever. And these are the candidates that need your help in order to get through, right? Because maybe you can't go drive up to Fort Wayne to go help them canvass, but maybe you could donate $5, or maybe you can do some phone banking or text banking, or maybe you can tell your family that lives in Fort Wayne, hey, if this isn't on your radar, really look at him or her or whoever is on the ballot. Like, I really think you should look at that. We need that grassroots effort again, but we also need to make it easy for people to do. So it is incumbent on our leadership, right? And people that are at those tables making those decisions, like me, saying we need this for people, because if not, we're just going to be even worse than we are right now.
I want to ask one more question, if I could. I want to take this in a little bit of a different direction. There's a lot being written about how this loss of rights is not going to happen equitably. That those who are from lower socioeconomic status or households will probably be paying a larger price for this loss of rights. And I was wondering if the two of you could comment on that, and what you think are the equity lenses that we need to be adopting, and how this could potentially affect different groups here in India.
Okay, it looks like Natalia is nodding at me. So, okay, but if you wanted to jump in. I mean, I completely agree with you, because this is an old playbook, right? First of all, that's what it means to be marginalized, is that the weight of things like this fall upon the people who are already bearing enormous weight, right? And so when I said that people have already been doing the work and are out there doing these things, most of the abortion funds that are out there right now in the South and other places in the Midwest are run by women of color, or were formed by women of color, or women who are facing, other aspects that put them at risk for not being able to access abortion. And that's going to continue. Whenever you remove a right, the problems sort of accumulate and multiply in these ways. And I think that what this tells us, number one, we really have to focus and support and amplify the women of color who've been doing the work for the past several decades, and beyond in this area. Number two, we have to recognize that the battles going forward are going to use really ugly stereotyping and talk about race and discrimination. So if you look at what the Supreme Court has been doing in most of its cases, and it tries to do in this Roe case, is that, or in the Dobbs case, it tries to flip the language of discrimination around, right? I mean, we see this all the time, that if somebody criticizes something, they're accused of cancel culture or stifling free speech, when they're just using free speech to counter someone else's free speech, right? It's the same thing in this area. You're going to see people flip the language of discrimination and say that they are protecting, imaginary unborn or something like that, and ignoring the real people who already exist and are here and, are human beings worthy of protection. In Indiana specifically, we know that many of the bills passing our legislature, as well as many of the actions, explicitly rely on ugly racial stereotypes. In Indiana, while abortion has been legal, 2 AAPI women were prosecuted for the imaginary crime of feticide. It doesn't even exist. And they were, and when they went on trial, both the people who prosecuted them and when they were on trial were full of disgusting, ugly stereotypes that had nothing to do with who they were, but also had nothing to do with the legal issues at hand. And you're just going to see so much of that. And, women, after Roe falls, we're going to see women prosecuted for miscarrying, and pregnancies are going to be policed, and the weight of that is going to follow. It's just going to fall on already marginalized groups. You're going to see the first women who are prosecuted will likely be women of color. They will be women who are in really difficult circumstances that, their histories and their experiences will be twisted and publicized in ways to try and make people have less sympathy for them. And that, just resist all of that when you see that, right? Like this, we know that equality is not promoted by oppressing certain people at the expense of others. We know that equality is not supported by taking away rights. Those are all, just, they're just blatant lies, and, just sort of people trying to cover up what they're really doing by using bland language of equality, but not actually promoting equality in any way. And we have to be very watchful of that, I think, and don't let those impulses, like, no matter, again, it's about the people and the principle. It doesn't matter what you think of somebody's life choices and what you think about what they've done or not done. What matters is whether you're protecting rights for everybody, including yourself.
Pamela?
I wonder if the Indiana Civil Liberties Union or any other civil liberties organization is teed up to start responding to this. I don't remember what kind of support that poor woman got who was accused of feticide, what her legal aid was like.
I think it's complicated. And as far as I know, I don't know about the inner workings of any of these organizations, but I do think people are gearing up for these fights and the legal battles. It's just, we don't know what they are yet necessarily. So you can't, but I think, again, it's just, I think the lessons learned from what happened in Indiana is that it's important to amplify the voices of the people who it's affecting, right? People needed to listen to those women and find out what they needed and what they wanted. And without having people who understood, who were sort of like had cultural competency, right? And understood how these words were being used against people unintentionally or even intentionally repeated them and made things worse, right? So this is what I meant about being really careful about, don't be duped by like the false language of, just because you use the word equality in a sentence doesn't mean you're actually promoting equality in any way, shape, or form. And just because you see somebody in a bad circumstance and it's not very sympathetic, or they don't look that attractive, or you're seeing somebody's mugshot or something like that, doesn't mean that that person isn't worthy of like all of the equal rights guaranteed by our Constitution and what we're here for. So I just can't emphasize enough how much awful stuff we're going to see playing out in terms of racialized stereotypes and the way that anti-discrimination principles are going to be used to divide people, and we just have to guard against that and not let that happen.
Yeah, perfectly said. I would just echo back to the original question is, I think that's 100% correct, and how can we do our best to, if you have any amount of privilege, is to connect neighbor or communities that need the services the most with the options that are available right now. And that's what I'm personally like going to do. I recognize my privilege, but I also recognize that I'm one person. So any kind of access that I have, how can I connect? Like I always like, how can I connect you with something else that's better, that's out there, that could help, right? And that's what I'm taking forward, because sometimes I do need to just, for myself, is to just dial it down a little bit so that it doesn't feel as overwhelming. I'm not stuck. Sometimes all this kind of gets me stuck, but it's like, how can I do my best to connect my community and other communities with these services in the short term? And that's what I would just say. Whatever communities that need it, these options are out there. It shouldn't just be the most privileged or the people with the most access to be able to access them.
Pamela, does that satisfy your curiosity?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm making lists.
I am too. Well, I think this is a really good time to conclude this conversation. I think given we spent an hour kind of wrestling over some of these things, has been really helpful. At least it has been for me. I want to just remind you all that I'll share this out on YouTube and make sure that there's links to this conversation. That way, if someone has questions and you want to reflect, give them a certain minute marker, we can do that. But also, I think the takeaway that I'll be bringing out and be sharing out from this is we need to be amplifying voices of those already doing the work, such as Hoosier Abortion Fund, All Options, Monroe County Now, and we need to continue to do what we can in our own circles of influence to kind of build these coalitions and to get ready. I think Shruti, that's really kind of what I heard from you just now. Is this is going to get rough, and we need to prepare ourselves.
Yes, and can I add one more group to the groups?
Of course you can. Of course you can.
Is NAPAF, the National Asian Pacific Women's Forum. We have an Indiana chapter that's been focusing on these issues and, understands that history I was talking about in Indiana of people being prosecuted in racially discriminatory manners for pregnancy outcomes.
And please, if you're going for a run or trying to get to sleep tonight and thinking of other resources, share them along. I'll make sure that I can share those with folks that listen to me, all 10 of them, but I'll share them out anyway. And we'll just keep working on this. Just as a reminder, it looks like Thursday, May 26th is the next Monroe County Now meeting, and that's we'll help publicize that. And anything else that we can do to publicize things, simply let me know.
Awesome. Thank you, Peter. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
So great.
All right. Thank you all. And we'll talk to you all soon.
Okay. Thanks.